Here for a new episode. So actually, there was a summer break, which I usually don't mention, but people go on vacation. As for me, I keep working like crazy. So the summer break was really for you. I gave you the chance to relax, but now the episodes are back. If you've been following me with the whole TO play thing, Settimo in Gioco, actually during this period, I've shared a ton of content on the TO play channel, but also on my own channel regarding Settimo in Gioco, though not current content, okay? As for Settimo in Gioco, that was a bit of an old recording, whereas TO Play is current, but that's a different channel. I encourage you to go check out the other content on that channel. But today, I like the idea of hearing from dear Raffaele Vota. Don't call him Raffman, because Rafa and I haven't known each other for 1,000 years, okay?
Yes, hi everyone. I'm Raffaele Vota, and everyone calls me Raffman now, ever since I started playing role-playing games. Maybe I'll explain why later. It's Le Hortolani's fault, and I'm not joking. It's kind of...
Le Hortolani, exactly. I remember that too. Anyway, that's the story.
Do you remember? Because, in fact, when you and I, Tuccio, were still together in our historic dream society, I was in contact with Le Hortolani since I used to go to conventions dressed as a Raffman cosplay. Even before the term cosplay was coined here, at least here in Italy, I was already cosplaying as Hortolani's exact character. And to thank me, he sent me a letter. He wrote in his own hand on the little Raffman character, disguised as Raffaele, so Raffaele became Raffman, and from there the nickname stuck, the historic one in...
Amidst all our ups and downs, there are designs, situations, you've created things. We've also tried a lot of your old works. Old, yes, but in our hearts they're always very young.
Specifically, we also created and tried out a lot of bad things together, especially at the beginning, because design and role-playing games at the time, as I've said elsewhere, didn't really exist. You'd pick up some rule book you liked. The most famous ones back then were Dungeons and Dragons, of course, but even the red box edition, so at the very beginning, and here in Italy, Cyberpunk, the games from Stratelibrai, you'd pick up a rule book you particularly liked without really knowing how widespread or actually functional it was. And
there was no market research, no.
Not just market research, but not even design research. You just take some rules you liked, put them together, try to make sense of them, and publish. And I had the luck, or maybe misfortune, of being published by the now defunct Rose in Poison. Actually, let me give a shout out to Sergio. I don't always do this. Hi, Sergio Vicovio, who, when I pitched him this thing of mine that I'm sadly, or maybe infamously known for, as I like to say, one shot, one kill, full of stuff you could get sued for, they immediately said, yes, let's publish it. Sure, there were some things they looked at, but they said yes. And that was good for me, because over the years, you become more and more aware of what you're doing. At least that's been the case for me with role-playing games. And that's it. You start studying, doing research, reading things even in English, and then you start thinking, actually, I could have written this differently. You do all sorts of experiments, even with you guys, with the association, who have put up with and supported me for so long, maybe too long, until I finally got to publish this latest project of mine.
And so this latest project is really your evolution, meaning there have been various ups and downs along the way. And at a certain point, you finally said, no, I'm ready now. I want to publish something else entirely.
Yes, that's right. So, as you probably know, I have a great love for action cinema, but I'm particularly drawn to the more niche kind. And in fact, I also made my very first production in that space. But I'm talking about something that happened about 20 years ago. This year, in fact, actually marks the 20th anniversary since the release of my film, Oso, as it was called by friends and foes alike, which was a project that dealt with B-movie action cinema. My personal evolution as an author from this particular point of view has been a process of moving from one way of making cinema, even action cinema, to a completely different one, infusing it with the specific elements that I personally liked more. So as a result, I've always really liked, within this particular genre, powerful themes like revenge, human suffering, and conflicted relationships. And so I eventually and naturally gravitated towards those specific areas, which are part of the genre, but interpreted in a different way. Here we're more in the realm of, can we mention it? Of course, we can
mention it. That's what we're here for, really. Yes.
This is the quick start guide that you can download for free for nothing. Then you'll add, of course.
Let's put some of them in the description. Don't worry.
So we effectively moved from the style of Action Cinema 3 to something that is much, much closer in tone to Sin City, or even more recently, The Boys, or Who Really Knows, a setting where there's a group of characters who, in my particular game, are always called the tough guys, precisely like I called them back in Osok. After leaving behind a very troubled and action-filled past, and after suffering a significant trauma that truly devastated them and made them hang up their guns for good, they were eventually called back into action. At first, it seemed to be by chance, mostly because they became famous all over again for having accomplished something quite special, and then later on by someone who, in some particular way, brought the team back together with the goal of making them the city's official tough guys once again. This was all because
the beginning of this very beautiful film genre is exactly that. We need our team. We need
our team, because Adder City, this dirty, wicked, violent city, but also incredibly fascinating, wonderful to experience, and above all to play in. The authorities don't care about the problems of ordinary people, or maybe their hands are tied, or perhaps they themselves are the problem to face and overcome. People don't have the means or the skills to solve this incredible problem. And so they need to ask for help from those who used to be the tough guys of Adder City. And those tough guys themselves need to prove once again to the city, and especially to themselves, that they are still the tough ones in town. Because their past, which they tried to leave behind after the trauma, is now their new present. In the meantime, they've ended up doing a normal job, which basically they don't like, a mundane, maybe even boring profession. That just doesn't satisfy them. They're the tough ones. They need to go back to being the tough ones. So we've created the opportunity for them to reunite, so to speak. They want to be brought together as a team to do what they do best. And what they do best isn't always so much fun, but it's definitely not boring, unlike a regular job.
Sure. So I imagine the opening scene. Sorry again for my voice, but that's how it is. I've just come off a rough weekend. So the scene I picture is the one where we're at the bar and our team is there. There's the waiter serving at the table, a bit annoyed, and he hears the phone ringing. These are the kinds of situations we can imagine at the start.
At the very beginning, I make a point to use specific terminology, much like many games do, in order to create the atmosphere, that particular feel of the setting. The problems to tackle are what I call the adventures. I like calling them that because they really are problems at their core, things that ordinary people come directly to you with. They come to you and might say, hey guys, I just can't take it anymore. There's this big bank in my neighborhood that's tearing up the streets. So maybe my son has been kidnapped, or I haven't seen him in 2 whole days, and the authorities, despite everything, just aren't interested. They'll say, I need your help. But of course, since it's the 80s or the early 90s, there are practically no cell phones except in a few very specific cases. We used to call them cool gadgets, the ones with the big portable satellite phones from a character like Colbert. Very impressive, but very rare.
It's a huge word, rather than
maybe even a little bit earlier than that. So the landline telephone rings, the one with I go out.
The bar owner walks over to him and says, hey, Frankie, I just wanted to let you know there's a certain individual here who has been asking for you.
I have the bar owner or someone who will later hang around what will become the tough guy's base of operations. Because how does it work at the beginning? The pillars are always the same. The tough guys get involved in a situation because they feel they're the only ones capable of doing the right thing, of helping people in trouble. But all this happens after they've come back into the spotlight, after facing a challenge which in fact has allowed them to get to know, to rediscover ordinary people. So after completing the mission, which takes place in the form of an interrogation between the boss and the players, and between the players themselves, in short, people ask each other questions, one to another, and at the same time, the rules are discussed. You go on to create, or rather to imagine, taking inspiration from something that emerged during the mission, what will become the new base of operations for the tough guys, the new team of tough guys. And from there, everything will then revolve around that. So yes, if the tough guy's base of operations is, for example, one of the tough guy's bars, because in the meantime, he went from being a tough guy to owning a bar and then went back to being a tough guy, then the phone that rings will be the one at the bar, for example, right? Or there might be other ways to contact Turid's team. For example, an ad in a newspaper that starts in a certain way to maintain a certain level of secrecy, or a contact, a journalist who knows how to reach the newly formed team of tough guys, of old tough guys. Once the current problem to tackle has been selected, he contacts the team leader and then arranges a meeting, of course. And this is really nice because in the game, one of the ways, maybe we'll talk about it in a bit more depth later, is to gain extra experience and make sure that the various relationships between the characters, among the tough guys, among themselves, and even with the characters they meet evolve in some way. So the more contacts and connections you create, the more bonus experience points you'll get at the end of the problem.
Sure. Okay. So I think I've got a pretty good grasp on it. But as you said, let's try to dig a little deeper, even just into the mechanics. Mainly because there are some things that help clarify in a player's mind how it might work. Let's take for granted that everyone listening to this kind of episode knows what a role-playing game is. And here, that's a given. And we'll gradually explain it as we go along, even if you're not that familiar with what it means. But anyway, we're sitting around the table. It's a narrative game where you talk. What usually helps people understand how a game works is what approach the game might have when I decide to do things that could often involve taking some risks. That's what I imagine, let's say. Yes, so basically, in practice.
This is something we tried to summarize and explain clearly in the quick start. In just a few pages, it was supposed to give a general overview of the game system, even for those who aren't familiar with role-playing games, and at the same time guide them toward the first challenge. So also showing how to solve an initial problem. Put very simply as possible, you could say that a role-playing game is a conversation during which, through role interpretation, each participant contributes to creating a story. And in this case, it's a very thematic story. The story of tough guys getting back into action to solve the problems of citizens in difficulty. Obviously, when you reach a certain point where you have to make an impact in key moments, like resolving a particular situation in role-playing games, it's common to use dice. Not always, but in most cases, when there's an obstacle to accomplishing something that a player in the shoes of their tough character wants to achieve, to face and overcome this obstacle, you go to the check, the main mechanic of the game. Once the check is made, it's determined whether and how much the character has managed to overcome the obstacle and get what they want or not. So with all the various intermediate outcomes, maybe they succeeded but had to pay a price, a more or less significant cost, or they failed, or they succeeded beyond their expectation.
Yes, that's the expectation. Yes, of course.
And
Oh, regarding this check, I'm sorry, please finish your thought and then I will ask my question. No, please go on.
go ahead and ask your question because they're already kind of connected.
Okay, perfect. So in practice, how do I actually pass this check?
So you might be asking, why did I accept? Well, it was after the World Ending Publishing, my publisher, and a quick hello to Tom and everyone else working with him, approached me. And it was because I really, really liked the fundamental idea of adapting my game. Anyway, I had originally started out with a different system, a different framework entirely called Rainbow 2 Reality before moving over to Monadeco. Now, Monadeco is essentially the generic game engine designed for role-playing games, and it's the one used by the vast majority of titles that are published by the World Ending because it really gives you that important sense of risk and consequence, you know? Because unlike other games, here it's you who leaves everything up to the roll of the dice. I mean, you roll the die and see what happens. You're the one who decides how many dice to bet or how many points basically to spend to get the result you want. So in practice, there's a calculated risk factor that's exciting. For example, let's say, I'll keep it short. I won't explain all the details. Sure. You have to break down a door. You describe the action and the boss, that is the master in this case, decides that the best attribute you should use is vigor because you describe it in such a way. You're not picking the lock. you're throwing your body against it in a very forceful way, and you have 3 in vigor. But to break down the door, he sets, let's say, the echo, a difficulty level of 5. You know that to succeed, at least with a cost, you need to reach 5. You roll 3, so you're missing 2 points. The great thing about Monad Echo is that those 2 points you're missing, you have ways to cover them.
So you can cover them by rolling a couple more dice or by spending a point, Soma.
I want to be
You are guaranteed to achieve at least one successful outcome.
the additional successes you need, you can get either by rolling as many dice as you need to reach 5 or by spending 2 points. Basically, with the success with cost option, it's automatic because you've reached the threshold, or you can use 1 die and 1 point. The nice thing about this system is that you still have to roll the dice, and if even just one of those dice, for example, the 2 successes you need to reach 5, comes up as a 1, then everything changes. So it's up to you to manage the risk-reward balance carefully.
Of course.
Say you need to reach 7 instead of 5, starting from 3, you'd have to roll 4 dice to get the 4 successes.
If you
Need them and the success comes,
with which die with those numbers?
no, you automatically get as many successes as the number of dice you decide to roll.
Okay, but you don't have to roll just 1 die.
But in these 4 dice you roll, you don't have to roll a 1. So from 2 to 6 is always fine. But the more dice you decide to roll,
the more likely it is that a 1 will come up.
exactly, because I'm almost dyscalculic. But if you roll 3 dice, it's already likely that you'll get at least 1. If you roll 6, it's almost automatic that you'll get a 1, right? Because it's a 1 in 6 chance, okay? And then the mathematicians, of course.
Right. So you're saying.
Exactly. So what are you saying? Maybe? What comes to your mind? Maybe the idea of, here's a thought. So I roll 4 dice, but what if I roll just 2? I reduce the chance of getting a 1, but still. And on top of that, I spend 2 some points, but some points, I only recover them at the end of the session, and you only have 6 in my game. That is, in this particular version, an iteration of Monad Echo, and then it's up to you to decide how many you need to save, maybe for the final showdown, because in the end, the problem has to be solved. You, in the end, after carefully weighing the risks and rewards, how much to bet or not, you'll reach a point where you'll decide in the final scene how to solve the problem. There's another really nice thing, in my opinion, the Intercity Blueser, which is kind of borrowed from Dogs in the Vineyard, which is one of my sources of inspiration from other role-playing games.
It's an excellent source of inspiration. It's
an excellent source of inspiration. The thing is, it's not so much about whether the tough guys manage to solve the problems or not, because the tough guys in the end, one way or another, will solve the problem. But how do they choose to solve it? So the investigation isn't a prerequisite for reaching the end or not. You get to the end anyway, you reach the conclusion. And this is another thing I've taken, I don't know, from the basic system. It's another one of my sources of inspiration. So you have the trail of clues. You just need to figure out where to look and how or to whom to entrust yourself regarding the clue. But in the end, you get there. However, when you do get there, there's a dilemma. My system is designed to present problematic situations and dilemmas that ultimately lead to a question: how do you solve the problem? We've reached this point. What do you do? You kill them all, you advise justice. In the meantime, something happens that makes you reconsider this moment. And maybe you say, wait a second, the bad guys aren't that bad. The possible villains are actually those who set me up with this problem. And so the perspective flips and the group has to make a decision. And the great thing is that each of them, based on the trauma they've experienced, on the kinds of situations they've been through, can have, and it's right that it should be this way, I hope it is, a different way, an idea, a different perspective on how to solve this problem. They might argue, clash, and fight about it, but in the end, they still have to make a decision.
After
making this decision and solving the problem in their own way, and maybe even disappointing the very people who hired them,
that
or here,
they will face the consequences, or in any case, their adventure will continue based on their choice.
This particular situation will certainly continue to go on, and the resulting consequences will eventually show up in the form of possible extra or even secondary problems that have since escalated in severity. So this means we'll see past situations that inevitably come back to the forefront, and pretty much everything from the past will be coming back up to the surface. And also,
with so many problems piling up, it's very possible these are the seemingly small individual things that add up over time. This is because they start to compound and create the long, desperate lines for homeless shelters.
Well, this
Pile up becomes something they have to solve. They remove
to solve even very personal things, which may then end up affecting the next central problem. That's the beauty of Monad Echo and also of Reflection and Dorsity Blues. These things also have or will have a mechanical repercussion. In Monad Echo, a tough character can take up to 3 injuries at most, okay? Both physical and emotional. So we have hit points.
Okay, so the rule is if you accumulate 2 physical and 1 emotional infraction, you are then considered out of the game. And then
you arrive and you basically show up either dead or off screen. But these emotional wounds can be inflicted by the boss or even by the test itself. For example, if someone dear to you, someone you have to protect and have included in one of the 2 character lists, which are always under the radar, and that's the white list, because then there's the black list, which is the list of bad guys, and you make these lists yourself. You decide who goes among the good guys and who among the bad guys, but there's always a cost. For example, if one of your actions ends up causing suffering to someone you care about, let's say to follow a lead, you end up involving your family, and this causes your daughter to suffer, maybe because she was waiting for you at her birthday party. This creates an emotional wound for you. Okay, sure, it creates an emotional wound. The general idea of an emotional lesson is that the tough guy changes and his relationships shift, but as the dynamics of your relationships change, not just with the good characters, the ones who anchor you to reality and keep you from giving up or saying, that's it, I'm picking up my guns for the last time, for the second and final time, and this time I'm disappearing for good. Because it's not a given that you die. Even your relationships with the villains change. So maybe you start to reconsider things like, is this person I've put on my blacklist really that bad? Or are they just a reflection of what I could have become if I weren't the tough guy in this situation? If I were in their shoes, how would I react? So by changing your perspective and your relationship with your characters on both sides, you also gain experience. It's true that you risk getting hurt, but in the end, you gain experience, as I've already mentioned. And this is a beautiful thing, and it's a concept by Alberto Tronchi, a great Italian designer whom I greet. He's the author of Brock and Taze, Dival Rave, truly an exquisite person who's also helping me with the writing of the game itself. In this ecosystem of cause and effect, it was perfect for the idea of blues, for my idea of having this group of tormented tough guys who get back in the game. But in the end, they'll run out of energy. They'll suffer too many injuries, especially emotional ones, and they'll go their own way. Their narrative cycle, their story arc will inevitably come to an end.
So with that in mind, this also leads me to believe that it's exceptionally well suited for campaigns that are relatively short in duration, and as a result is designed to follow a single cohesive narrative arc.
Yes and no, in the sense that we studied and tested this aspect a lot during playtesting. The playtest lasted 2 years.
Afterwards,
the last draft from when we started adapting the Monadeco until today, well, maybe a bit earlier, let's say a year and a half with the Monadeco, but with the other systems, which still keep the same structure much longer, I lost my train of thought. What was I supposed to say? Single campaigns or...
Exactly. Short campaigns, or I would have liked to see if I could make them last a bit longer.
Whatever you want, meaning that it's true that another reference, this time from television, is... besides obviously the A-Team, it's the series with Richard, The Poise, I'm Nobody, and the great movie with Bob Odenkirk. He really seems like the tough guy created for my game. I mean, he was the result of Steel, then he was about to kill someone and says, no, but I want a normal life. I want to become like he eventually became. He saved his life, started a family, settled down, started working as an accountant for a company, maybe his brother-in-law's, if I remember correctly. Then the past came knocking at his door again, and he and his daughter realized that he was still and could only ever be the tough guy in town, and he went back to doing what he used to do. And I repeat, what he used to do isn't trivial because it involves the messes of the higher-ups. So how does it work? It works like this. When you're super injured, you still have a chance to keep going by taking a wear and tear hit, okay? But this particular kind of wear and tear impact changes you on an even more profound and personal level because it brings into play an additional and very important descriptor, one that is quite literally and directly tied to your own personal way of experiencing the world in your life. So for example, to avoid a fatal injury, what do you do? You say the bullet didn't hit you, you act on the narrative, but inside this creates a different feeling. And so maybe you add a descriptor like, from now on, my own safety is my most precious asset. Yes, exactly. And so you might end up deciding that the life of that innocent person in a similar situation isn't so important anymore. But maybe that innocent person died because you didn't care, because this is a new descriptor you use to save your own life, and it wears down, or rather it damages another tough guy, because maybe, right, what do? You let him die. So it creates a beautiful dynamic in the game, which the game itself, through its mechanics, encourages and promotes. And in my opinion, that's the beauty of the game. But anyway, when you reach the fourth wear and tear hit, in the end you have to decide, what do? You can choose to disappear forever, or you can take a tough NPC in the story who has naturally evolved into a tough guy, so to speak, or who could be a candidate as a tough guy, add some stats to him and insert him into the team of the two remaining in your place.
Of course.
So it's true that a player could say, that's enough for me, I'm leaving, but maybe then another player takes his place with another tough guy, or he himself changes character.
So it could be that the narrative arcs of the characters within a campaign lead to a bit like we can also recall in A Forge in the Dark, where it suggests to you, that the crew can be recycled, players can swap characters, new players can join. Exactly, right? So the idea is actually that the campaign itself, if we're talking about the campaign and the overarching story, maybe specifically about Verte City could be a long campaign, but obviously the narrative arcs of the characters will have a duration with a beginning and an end. This ending will hit even the toughest ones who remain, and it will change the story of the city.
Exactly. And then new tough guys will step up who have their own way of living life, of experiencing the city, and of solving problems in different ways. And maybe they'll clash with the old tough guys because they were used to solving problems their way. Beautiful.
Then they become NPCs, which is fantastic. And
this thing here, this is what I think is great, because the best series are always the ones that have something that shakes things up. Let's take Breaking Bad, for example. Here, you start out as a chemistry teacher who, in order to secure a future for his family, after discovering he is basically terminally ill or in an advanced stage of cancer, reinvents himself, if I can say this on a live stream, as a criminal and starts producing substances that aren't exactly legal. So, from being a humble teacher, by the end of his story arc, he becomes a criminal of international renown. This
change is believable because the beginning of the series makes you empathize so much with his problem that it gives you a plausible justification. So it's not unbelievable, it's actually plausible.
For
you understand his choices and you find yourself on his side, even though at this point he is undeniably a criminal.
Exactly, because two rivals have to make decisions when they reach the end of the problem that can be not just a bit unorthodox, but downright extreme, even criminal, because at that point they feel like the tough guys in town. What they do is, in their eyes, the right way to solve the problem. I do it my way, you do it your way. We argue, but then we find a way and solve the problem with our own methods. We don't care about anything else because we've got guts. We're the tough ones. We have the means and the skills to do it. But as soon as you solve one problem, another one comes up right away, and it escalates from the previous one. But you, in turn, will have changed as well. It's something you can't avoid. And above all, this is somehow emphasized even when, at the end of the problem, there's a debriefing phase. This rule book here, you can't really see it well, is explained on the last page, what you'll find in the Finesasa manual, which is a bit more substantial. On this page, it's also explained, or at least it hints, that the game is structured so well, I can say that, correct me if I'm wrong,
that immediately after
the mission phase, which brings the tough guys back into play, it starts with the base building phase. Then there's the phase with various problems, which in quotes is really the core of the game, but it's all still part of the game that moves the campaign forward, changes the tough guys. At the end of each problem, there's the debriefing phase where you, in your base, this is something automatic, it always happens, a sort of epilogue where you talk with the boss and explain the feelings and emotions your character experienced, the various conflicts that may have arisen and been acted out with the other tough guys and other people. This gives you not only another opportunity to develop your character, but also a chance to earn more or fewer experience points. Because if you justify the fact that, in your opinion, yes, the problem was solved just as your tough guy imagined it, but you also reflect on the character, which can sometimes coincide in some way,
then
you will earn the maximum possible experience points.
Otherwise, it also allows you to increase those values you mentioned, which already give you the number of valid successes depending on the check.
And it's not just about that, because it's also important to understand that in the world of Monadeco, you will find there are fundamentally three core concepts that you need to be aware of. These are known as descriptors, attributes, and finally, gifts.
So the values we talked about earlier are the attributes.
Yes.
Descriptors are things present in the field.
So in essence, attributes were used to mathematically calculate and determine exactly how far you are from achieving a successful outcome.
Exactly. Descriptors
represent what you were before. So you show up at the cinemas when you were the well-known tough guy, what you are now. That is the profession you carry out under a different guise. Because remember, at a certain point you said, enough. I don't want to be the tough guy here, only to become one again after the mission. And then there's the combat technique. These descriptors not only guide you in choosing gifts, which are kind of like the cinematic powers, the tough guy's cinematic powers, but they're also a way to channel soma. That is, you can't spend soma points, which would be your willpower for the scene.
If there's not a descriptor that amps up the situation.
Exactly. So if you're a classic cliche character, there are 6 examples, if I remember correctly. I wrote it, but I can't quite recall. There are 6 classic cliches, which translates into 6 distinct professions derived from 2 fundamental archetypes. For example, if you select the profession named the Avenger, it means your character is a former detective from the official police squad of a figure known as the Doctor. Imagine a scenario with a character, City, who then has to become an Avenger, essentially acting as a detective, and you find yourself trying to get someone to spill the beans. Well, in that particular kind of situation, that is the perfect time when you can channel your soma.
Of course, because within your narrative sphere, let's call it that, your archetype of your
cliche, but also your profession, which is actually a way to channel soma in a more conventional way. For example, if you're a chef, you have to pretend to be a chef thanks to my profession. So I get hired at this place. I had to do some investigations because, in fact, I am a chef. I prepare them a dish, a drink, precisely to test my skills. In that case, to avoid making mistakes, I decide to use soma and not roll the dice. So I get an automatic success. And I can use soma because I have the chef profession, and therefore I've placed myself in that environment where I can do it. I'll give you an example.
One last technical question, because then we'll get to the final point, which will probably lead us to try your module in September.
Which will be your play, right?
In fact, we'll remind everyone about it. So if anyone is curious to come meet you or wants to participate in the event you'll be hosting, they'd be more than welcome. But the technical question is this. You said you have 6 soma points in the session. Is there any way to recharge these soma points during the session?
Well, no, not exactly, because in other games, for example, the one called Dead Air Seasons, yes, that's Dead Air Seasons, also published by the company Warden V. It's a game that is absolutely wonderful and expertly evokes the very specific and typical situations from the classic story of Astawazel, which I believe is the tale of the girl who knew too much. Am I correct in thinking that? I mean, those games are fantastic, in my opinion. But not just because they're the ones publishing them. If I play their games, I play them because they're fantastic, in my opinion, not because my game had 2 adaptations. No, it's
important to have the principle of scarcity, of tension, of focus.
Above all, the sense of inevitability. You know that in the end, you will have to face what you've done, your past,
and what
you are,
your discomfort,
become. And so in the end,
you end up having to suffer some harm anyway, in the end, to
decide how much you're willing to endure and to put yourself on the line to get what you want and for what's best for others, for the people who have asked for your help. There's a very strong sense of self-destruction because that's the fate of the tough ones.
Exactly. That's part of that kind of cinematic fiction. That kind of fiction specifically expects that in the end, the tough guy is self-destructing.
Exactly. Just look at the tragic characters in Sin City. What they do it because in that moment, they believe they've managed to bring a bit of light into the despair that grips the city, and by extension, the citizens who are constantly subjected to abuse, who constantly live through situations that for them may even feel far more dramatic. I mean, you don't want them to live. You've lost your own child for one reason or another. But then there's also the way to create trauma in the manual, right? Loss, failure, mistake. They all have some nice systems for that.
Of course.
They're very proud of them. And maybe you say, no, I've already lost my child. I don't want him to lose his child, to be far away and so on. I want to help so he doesn't have to go through the same trauma I did.
But
in the end, anyway,
you have to
reckon with the powerful.
Oh my. Well, look, I'll tell you, since I'm super curious, as I mentioned, we'll definitely see each other at your play because As you know, I'll be there, so we'll definitely meet there. That way you can tell me more about it. I'm telling you now, honestly, because I'd really like it if we get the chance. If we have the chance, let's go deeper into the topic. I mean, usually these meetings of mine are about sharing the game in a lighthearted way, because I also want to make sure that if someone who knows about role-playing games but isn't that experienced comes across our video, I want to provide content that's enjoyable even for those who aren't super nerds, super into systems and stuff. But I am a super nerd, so regardless of the standard goal,
We need to get them to switch. We need to ask them, do you want to keep playing monocles or do you want to be tough and play something that's really cool to me?
exactly. So if you want to play like the tough guys, we invite you. Remind me, when exactly will you be at the event with the Dream Room, if I'm not mistaken?
I'll be at 2Play. And then also, yes, that's correct. On Sunday, I will be at Gamix Piemonte. Afterwards, I will be heading to Lucca. My presence at Lucca is very important because I'll be there supporting our main distributor to officially present the physical printed version of the Quick Start Guide. It's worth noting that you can already download the digital version of this Quick Start completely for free simply by signing up for the newsletter on our BakerKit page. So, for those who are unfamiliar, BakerKit is the main website platform that we use for our campaign. You will eventually use it for important tasks like managing your pledge, finalizing your order, and providing your shipping information.
The crowdfunding for the game's launch. Exactly.
Just leave the link in the description so I can go check everything out, and I'll try not to say anything silly.
Then, if you have any updates about the melodic issue, we'll share it or update the description anyway. So don't worry about that. We'll keep each other posted. If the link changes, just check the description to be sure, because now it's time to go.
The link won't change though. Yes, we've launched on the platform and I'm really, really happy. Meanwhile, I'll keep writing for any additional content that might come out.
And
it's going to be a great product and I'm very proud of it in the game of life. Let me just thank you, apart from the fact that you've been really kind and it was a pleasure to meet you.
But then it's the highlight of this season.
I am just really
super happy. Yes, thank you.
Me too. No, I also wanted to thank, besides you, Tommaso De Veneri, one of the bosses at the Gardingville, who believed in the project so much that he published me. I want to thank Pardu, which is his character in the game who stays a bit in the background, but he was basically my first reviewer, the one who still reviews all the amateur products I publish on my own. It was him who told me, come on, stop writing nonsense, go, get the Le Bonabecco series and use a serious system. And it worked.
Yeah, but I just threw it in your face like that. Oh, good.
Exactly. I want to thank Lorenzo Fossetti, who since 2018 or 2019, so when I first started considering the idea of making the serious version of Osso, has always been right there by my side. I want to thank Serena, because without her, she's my partner. I wouldn't be here. I mean, I never would have gone back to writing, to doing what truly made me feel good, apart from being with her, which does me good. And then I want to thank, okay, that's enough, or I'll get emotional. I'm supposed to be tough. And
then, yeah, but you know, the
guys in the Dream Room, Andrea Di Giac, Roberto Fox Marcarini, who was also an author here, and Andrea Zani. We say the last name, at least the only one. I didn't say the first name, which is the worst thing you can do at night. He's super private. And well, Tasca, you too, because you all acted as playtesters for me during this year and a half, always, almost every Sunday, losing, insulting me, rightly scolding me, and often giving me a hard time. And thanks to all these people and many others whom I will mention in the final manual, I was able to make a lifelong dream come true, which really makes me incredibly happy.
Great. Look, we really couldn't have ended this any better. We'll see you on September 13th and 14th. In any case, the episode will remain online, both on YouTube and on the channel dedicated to role-playing games by Around the Game. Thank you.
Thank you too. Bye, Tuccio.
Bye, everyone.
Bye, everyone.